Okay, we are ready to begin the process of working this blade some with the sharpening stone. I'm moving my light in the hopes that you'll be able to see everything better. See that blade. Let me check and see how that looks there. Well, you get the idea anyway. Might take the might take the camera around and let you see what we're doing and how we have it set up here. So the handle of the sword is viced in, and we've got the rough grind going all the way up. I'd like for you to notice something here that's real important. Just get a little bit of room here. My wires are tangled. Okay, can you see this little spike? This little silver line right here, I left that on there because that is the burr that just kind of peeled off on my last run through. Each time we ground that bevel down, you can see there the two bevels are meeting very nicely in the middle. Let's go back to our chart that we started this class with. So we started off with some thick shoulders. And what we did is we eliminated that shoulder to create, instead of a convex kind of a shape or a thick shoulder, into a steep meeting point, such as a factory edge, and we reground it to be a straighter, longer, thinner edge down to a small tip. And so you saw how we began, and now here's how we have ended up. And we used the belt sander up to this point to get that nice fine edge. And as I was finishing up the final sand, we were talking about finding that little silver line, which is the burr edge. The burr edge would peel off a little bit into these long, beautiful pieces here, like this. That burr edge will get smaller and smaller and smaller until it's as thin as a hair. But that's just because our eyes aren't very good. If we had a microscope, we could still see a lot of jaggedness on that edge. So we're going to begin using our sharpening stone to do the real work here. Yeah, I wish I had a better background so you could see the sword better, but I'm not going to redo my whole entire workshop just for this video. I think you'll be able to get the information just fine. If you do mount the steel of the blade in your vise, be sure to use a pad of some sort, like some leather. You can see here I've got some leather even holding the handle so that the handle doesn't get crushed or marred up. I'm going to take my bucket and begin with the 1000 grit side. Even though this is a 1000 grit stone, which would be really fine by most standards of sandpaper and such, this is such a nice stone, being what it is, a Japanese water stone, that it still aggressively removes metal material. This is a stage where it's very easy to mess up your sword, just like every stage. But the main idea, and it's good to practice first before you work on a nice piece, is holding this angle absolutely the same. So I'm going to get a few camera angles so that you can see this from different places. I'll start with where we are right now, and then I'm going to move the camera around so that you can see this motion. There's no real important type of motion to make other than just careful, because the rest of this blade is out here and you're kind of standing over it with your neck if you slip and fall. I do have some blade proof, knife proof Cordova cut level 3 gloves that I will put on as the sword starts to get where we're going, because one little brush and you'll just open your hand right up. Ask me how I know. All right, so I'm just going to begin massaging this blade. One nice thing about working a blade that's mounted is I can really use the whole block of the stone. So yeah, I do like to use the whole thing. Since the edges are a little bit less used than the rest of it anyway, I'm going to work that edge just a little bit right up in there. It's okay to have a forward-backward motion like this. It's okay if you do circles. None of that really matters nearly as much as steady, constant pressure, and most importantly, not changing the angle of your wrist in the stone. Every once in a while, I'll do some long strokes to make sure that I'm not working one area a lot worse than the other. Just kind of smooth it all in. You can begin to feel the steel underneath you. Work one area, slowly coming out farther, slowly coming out farther. I may end up moving the sword up into the vise a little farther so I have less movement out here on this outside portion. In fact, I'll definitely do that when I get to the tip. But for the middle and the base of the sword, this is working pretty well. Okay, we're going to change the camera angle now. Let's just see what's going on from a different spot. I'm feeling for my burr along that opposite edge, checking to see if it's even, nicely burred evenly all the way down. This is the slurry that comes from the grinding. It's mixing metal with the stone dust. And that stuff's really good for increasing the speed at which you're eating the metal away. So now I have a different angle. Gosh, I had a warning on my phone just now. Oh, shucks. I think I didn't. If somebody's watching, which I see that you are, I'm actually starting this over because I'm recording this video privately to list for someone else on how to sharpen samurai swords. I'm doing a special video on sword sharpening here. So anyway, nice to have you. Maybe I'll just keep going with it. I could do that. My question now is how long it was paused. So I'm going to repeat some of the stuff that I just said because the video was paused for a moment and I don't know how long. So just in case we missed a bunch of stuff, what I'm working right now is my 1000 grit sandpaper and really focusing on not changing the angle of my wrist and getting to feel the steel. And when you hand sharpen items, especially important items, it's really important that you just learn to feel it. And that feel is developed over time through practice, which is why I was saying when starting this whole series that I'm making right now, that you got to practice on some stuff that you don't care about too much. I just can't emphasize that enough. if you go trying to sharpen a sword and it's the first thing you ever sharpened, it's just going to be ugly and dull. So we're currently on about the 7th portion of a series on sharpening a samurai sword from scratch. I'm using YouTube Live to record it. Usually I do these unlisted and then save the link. I think tonight I accidentally hit public, so we've got somebody joining us live. So whoever you are, welcome. Folks can argue all day long about the technique of stroke that you use on a sword or a knife. That's not as important as maintaining the proper angle of your sharpening stone. That's kind of all that matters, really. So I'm going to go back to what I was going to do a minute ago and change the angle here. And sword, any blade, deserves incredible respect, especially a sword. I normally wouldn't talk to anyone. I wouldn't have anybody in my workshop with me while working on something like this. I don't want to be bothered, but I can't make a video about it without talking to you guys a little bit. So here's a very similar thing to what we just did, but a slightly different angle, so you can see kind of what's happening here. First, I work intensely on an area. Especially right up in here. This is a tough spot to get to. Right there. And then I do some long strokes. All right, we're going to go over to the other side. The stone is starting to get a little bit dry. You can see there. So I'm going to put the stone into the water and re-soak it real well. And I'm curious what sort of camera angle might get the best shot of this other side. Not work from over the sword downwards like this, because you're exposing yourself to serious injury. And ask a professional if they've ever cut themselves. But some cuts are more serious than others. They all hurt. Getting cut on something like that versus falling on your neck on a samurai sword are two different ball games here. So pretty soon I'm going to put my armored glove on. We're going to do just a little bit more grinding, and then I'm going to put my knife cut-proof gloves on, because basically what's happened at this point, get my pun, is that we've curled that burr edge over. And so I've illustrated all that on the whiteboard already. But we've curled a burr edge over. You can feel it on this back side. There's a little bit of a burr edge. So now we're going to come back on the opposite side and flatten off and polish. We've already worked through about 4 or 5 grits of sandpaper to get to this point. We're now on the 1000 grit waterstone. And we're going to come back and we're going to knock it down even smaller. So at this point it becomes dangerous. It's not near where we're going to go by the time that this video series is over. But if you brushed against it, it would open your skin up. We're basically walking water bags, you know. I've got an injured wrist at the moment, thanks to tackling some guy this morning. But if I can use my left hand with this, I'm gonna. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to reposition the sword so I can use my right hand. We'll see if I can keep it nice and steady. This is where you can kind of see that angle. You can take your stone, and if there's a little dark shadow like a line, or if it's coming over the top, you can kind of get an idea of if you're at the angle. The stone is not where we are deciding the shape of the bevel. Okay, that's only if you're out in the woods and all you've got is a stone. We're using a belt sander to decide the angle or the shape of that bevel, and then polishing with the stone. Very important concept. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of unnecessary hours working to sharpen that blade. Now, if you're new to sharpening, it just might never get sharp. You may wonder why, and that's because your wrist is moving. I like to use the entire length of the stone, but up in this one little area right here, it's really tricky to get to for me. And since I typically use the middle of the stone anyway, more than the ends, I'm going to wear that down a little bit, just getting this side. The main reason that people sharpen something forever and it doesn't get sharp is just because they don't have their angle right. Their angle moves of the blade or the stone or whatever it is that they're sharpening. Now we're going to start moving down the blade some more. I'm watching that angle of that stone with my eyeball real close. I'm making sure it doesn't change. People want to roll over as they're applying pressure, and that will ruin your edge. You've got to change the pressure on the stone as you move to keep that edge perfect. And keep that angle perfect. Okay, I'm going to move our camera angle again as my stone soaks up a little more water. And I'm going to move the sword in a little bit in just a moment on the vise. Let's see if our thing's still functioning here. Yeah, it's still working. Maybe I can move this light so that you can see the blade a little better. This is called high dollar production right here. It's the big money. Yeah, that's kind of cool. You can see that we got a little bit of a hot spot on the metal, but you can definitely see the blade a little bit better there. Unfortunately, even though I'm charging, my battery is dropping really fast, so I'll have to just let this be part of the series tonight. If you just joined us on YouTube Live, what you accidentally jumped in on was a private recording of samurai sword sharpening that I accidentally didn't put in unlisted. So usually my videos are unlisted, but since I'm going and since I can't repeat these opening stages of this particular step of sword sharpening, here we are. So nice to have you anyway. We're going through a video series that's probably going to end up at 8 or 10 parts. Pretty short, anywhere from 10 to 25 minutes each. And I'm teaching how to sharpen a Japanese katana from start to finish. from a factory crap edge or no edge at all. Sometimes they come dull, all the way up to the point where when we finish this, I'll be able to glide the sword down my arm and it will just shave the hairs right off the body. And it will be a good structure, meaning it will be able to withstand a lot of punishment. If you cut bamboo with a sword and it kills your edge right off the bat, I really prefer to work on this side of the blade from right here. Not just because I'm right hand dominant and I've got a little bit more control of that hand, but it also is a little. I hate standing with my neck right over the edge of the sword. I mean, maybe that's just self-preservation instinct. Another thing that's really good is if you have a headlamp. And I've got a pretty good light set up for the camera right now, but a headlamp is really helpful for this because you've got to be able to see the smallest little deviations in your angle, and you can feel the burr. Okay, the burr is something you'll be able to feel with your finger, but you can see it also, which is nice because sometimes, if you spend hours and hours doing this, you start to kind of go crazy. Like, if you can see it and feel it, it's better than just feeling it or just seeing it. All right, here we go. We're gonna start a little bit more intense right here and work our way out. Again, I'm just using part of the stone here because that part of the stone doesn't get used enough anyway. One of the things that I teach when using a sharpening stone is you got to use the whole stone, or else you'll belly it out too fast, and then you've got to flatten it. So flattening it is a part of this understanding, because if you can't flatten your sharpening stone, then you're not going to have good edges on your blades, whatever they are. It doesn't matter if you're sharpening broadheads for bow hunting or pocket knives. And every type of edge has different characteristics, different angles. Some angles are really made to take abuse. Some angles are made to be real fine and real sharp. We've been studying this sword since the beginning of this video series. And so it has some real unique characteristics. It's a very thick, heavy-duty, modern survival sword made by Honshu. It's high carbon steel, and someone brought it to me to fix up and sharpen for them because they don't come from the factory with a hand sharpened 6,000 grit polished waterstone blade usually. I'm going to have to use my left hand here a little bit. Being able to look straight down the blade as you're sharpening is really ideal, especially if you're just learning how to sharpen, because you can see the angle of that stone. And going from here to here will ruin your blade. I'm going to do that up close. Going from here to here will ruin your blade. You won't have a sharp knife. You won't have a sharp sword. You got to be able to see what it is you're doing. I like these big, thick stones. I don't really have to worry about my fingers sticking out around the bottoms, because this right here means you have 3 less fingertips. And like I said when we started this video, these are going to come on pretty soon. I don't play around. I've learned enough lessons. You can see it in my hands. I've got a lot of stories in my hands from knives that taught me humility. One time I cut my knuckle open in a knife safety workshop. Like, I was teaching knife safety. Slice that thing open. I felt pretty good about that. Just kidding. So, well, that's what you don't want to do. And then I finish up with some real long strokes, smoothing out any areas that might have been a little bit neglected. I'm using quite a bit of pressure here. I'm pushing. I'm working out. You know, I'm getting a sweat, which is why it's dangerous if you slip, because you've got some power in it. You can cut yourself. Let's see if our camera's still rolling over here. Yeah, it's still going. Okay, I've got this one little area out here I need to work on. Out here near the end. Might be able to see it better if I put my light over here. There we go. So we've worked up to here on this side, and we're going to do this last little portion here on the right side. The tip requires special attention. And the tip doesn't just get kind of glossed over with the rest of the blade. The tip gets its own little session. That curvature out there. You know, traditionally, in the art of the katana, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, the cutting is done with this portion of the sword anyway. If you ever see a real old samurai movie and somebody has their neck about half cut off and they're still gurgling and talking, they're like, oh, good technique. Oh. It's because the swordsman didn't cut their head all the way off. He just sliced their neck open with this portion of the sword. A lot of times, and so some sword styles don't even involve cutting with this portion of the sword, and it would be a little bit duller to withstand the blows of combat. So that's where we were talking about in a previous portion of this video series that I'm making. Some knives are differentially sharpened for different purposes within the same blade. Some are made for hacking and chopping, and then they have a fine area for finer cuts. And only the person that owns that knife knows what area, you know, they kind of know their own knife. And that's one of the beauties of being able to sharpen your own blades, especially things like kukris, bush knives, survival knives. So some swordsmen would keep a portion of the blade a little bit more hefty and thick to be able to deal with the blows of other things, and then rely on the last third of the sword only or less for slicing blows and killing cuts. But my friend that was asking to have this sword sharpened is going to get a completely sharpened sword, because that's what he wants. That's what he's going to get. If everything collapses in society and you see somebody walking around with a Honshu high carbon blade, you can say, I know who sharpened that sword on the wastelands of the southeast. Again, if you're noticing that I'm only using a portion of the stone, that's just because I'm equaling out for the overuse that the middle of this stone typically gets anyway. The middle of this stone gets too much use, even with a mindful practitioner of sharpening. So sometimes whenever I have an opportunity, I'll work the edges a little bit more. It just delays the time necessary before I have to really flatten this stone back out. Now we're going to do our long strokes now. And now a blending stroke. It's important to note that we're not just tuning up an already sharp sword. We have taken this sword from crap to sharp. And so that's why it gets a lot of this extra attention. If you've got a sword that's well maintained, you can start with the 6,000 grit polisher on a double-sided waterstone and just touch it up. You don't have to use this 1,000 grit side. But we are reinforcing the angle that we have created, our new bevel angle that we've created in this video series. Now I'm feeling for the burr, and I want to feel it equally along the whole side. And if the gum of your sharpening stone has sort of built up on the far side, then you can clean that off so that we can feel for sure. Always be very careful to brush away from the edge. Look how my thumb is kind of growing as it goes down. That means I can't cut myself as I make that stroke. You ever eaten food, like eating peanut butter off of a really sharp hunting knife? You can do that as long as you go away from the edge, like that. And if you go straight with the edge, or even worse, against the edge, you're gonna add more iron to your food than you probably meant to. So now I'm going to check the whole thing. We're feeling for a burr. Hopefully there's no burr on this side because that's the side we just worked. If I made an error with the angle of my stone, or if I need to work it more, there will be some burr on this side. I don't feel any. So now we're going to come back on this side, and I do feel a perfect. It's so small, I almost can't feel it. I'm not even going to bother getting the light and the camera over here because I don't think it'll pick it up, but I can feel it. The human hand can feel differences of distance of, I think, 1/10,000th of an inch. It's like if you've ever hand loaded, rifle ammunition, you can run your thumb over that primer down in the back of the bullet, and you can tell if that primer is all the way seated in. A human being's sensitivity to small difference on their fingers is very, very high. And so that has me really happy with that side. So now I'm just going to work on the tip a little bit, and that'll be the end of this particular component of the video. And for those that are studying this video series to master sharpening your own sword, the only thing that you're not going to see that I'm not going to record is I'm going to repeat exactly what you just saw one more time kind of quick, and just make sure that there's a perfectly even burr, and then knock it off, perfectly even burr on the other side, and clean it up real good, and like eyeball it and look at it and get happy. And then we're going to record the next segment when we flip that stone over and go to the polishing side. I do like to do a little bit of a countdown. So on the very last stroke, when this thing is basically done with this particular grit, I'll do like 5 strokes on one side, 5 strokes on the other side, 4 strokes on this side, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, and then maybe one more real light one, and one more real light one. And that'll be going this way as if the blade was cutting into the stone on each one of those. I won't have any strokes away from the blade, because what we're doing is we are eliminating the little burr completely with what's possible at that grit. There will still be a microscopic burr, but up to the 1,000 grit size, the burr will be eliminated. Every time we stroke away from the blade, we create a little bit of a hook where the metal kind of peels over on the opposite side. And so before we move up to the next grit, and I think that in a previous part of this series, we did that with a small pocket knife anyway, just so you could see what I'm talking about exactly. So now I'm going to hit the tip. the very outside portion of that blade right there. There's a little bit of flex in this blade because of the distance from the vise grip, but because I can support it with this other hand, I'm feeling comfortable. We'll just study it and we'll see how it goes. Again, I'm just going to repeat myself so that if you missed it earlier, you don't get the wrong impression. And that is, the stone naturally wears in the middle more as you use it. That's why you have to flatten them. And so when I start off and I'm being a little bit less particular, I'll often use the ends of the stone to get that grind going and to eat metal away kind of fast, which also helps even my stone out a little bit. It makes up for the fact that the middle gets lower anyway. It slows down the warp of my sharpening stone. You've got to absolutely be tuned in and paying attention. I'd recommend anybody that's sharpening something for the first 50 times to always have your protective gear on. I mean, like one little slip, right? You go over the edge and come down, you're freaking toast. I mean, I might just do it just because there's probably some kid watching this video one day and they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to go sharpen my sword. So this is a good investment. Here, I'll tell you why I don't like it. You want me to get crude? I can talk about condoms, but you can't really feel, you can't feel as well with a glove on. Once I start getting way up into the 6,000 grit, I'm going to deal with it and stick that glove on. But I can't quite feel the steel as well. You know, like it's a fine thing. Tips are very difficult. A lot of times when I'm teaching people how to forge blades and make knives, you know, they get to a point where I can just leave them and I can get back to work and let them go, but they always come back when they get to the tip because they can't get the tip right, and that's almost universal. Tips are challenging. One of the big secrets with knives is when you actually get to where you're like 98% sharp on the tip from the blade side, you come back and you come down on this side of the knife with just a few strokes right there. That's coming in on the back side will really make your tip pop. You know, if you come down this side a little bit after you've done the blade side, that's one thing that'll really help your tips get pronounced, well pronounced. Oh, we're getting there. You see, that's like starting to cut my stone. That's good. It's a good sign. If you don't want to dump your stone in the bucket, you can just drip. You can get water, drip, just like that. Check our camera. Yeah, we're still going. It's fun. Fun thing about Instagram is I know who's watching. With on this thing, I don't have any idea who's watching. So nice to have y'all. You're getting access to a behind-the-scenes video that was never meant for the public, but it is now. That's all right. I might just leave it. This course is going to be on udemy.com. It's going to be a samurai sword sharpening class that'll be available at udemy.com in my little online school there. We're taking this sword from the factory to a razor sharp blade and teaching about bevels and heat and all kinds of aspects. We aren't forging in this series. I do have another series on forging, but it's too much to do all at once. This is where I'd like to have a headlamp. A headlamp would be really nice. I'm going to move the light a little bit for my sake. It's not going to help y'all see much, but I'm going to move it right there so I can see right in there a little bit better. Yeah, that's good. And I'll show you the finished result here in just a moment. Okay, drop your water stone in the bucket. I'll even show you what that looks like, just in case there's any question. Doesn't need to be any question. There's my bucket. And here is our sword coming along. Now what I'm looking for, I'll come back later and get some of those rougher scratches out. That's not a big deal. What we're wanting to see if I can move the light so that you can see it a little bit better, is right in there. And the light is just too bright. I can see that by looking to see if I move it a little farther away, maybe. We want a really clean edge. Really clean edge. Look straight down on it here. This is sharpened up to 1000 grit. I'll do just a little bit more work off camera, so I don't have to worry about looking at the camera and making sure it's charging and all that stuff. That tip turned out real nice. When you wipe things off, make sure you wipe away from the blade. There you go. You can see some swirl from that 1000 grit. This is what I mean by wiping away from the blade. Don't ever wipe with the blade or towards the blade. It can't cut you like this. I feel just the slightest bit of a burr right there. And so that burr will speak to you. It'll tell you where you need to touch it up a little bit. Okay, so if you've got a little burr here and no burr here, we need to come in and work a little bit right there. There's a little bit of a burr right there. And this is an epically huge sword. It's like way bigger than one I would train with or carry. Really, really long sword, but to each their own. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit more off-camera work to smooth this up and just make sure everything's nice and even. Nothing new, no new techniques other than what we covered tonight. And once it gets ready to move on to the 6000 grit, I'll start a new video and we will record that. If you see this on YouTube and you're enjoying it, come check us out. Check me out. I've got a Patreon page, patreon.com/2dogs. That's number 2. And udemy.com. I've got a couple of classes up there right now. We've got edible medicinal plants, a bow staff course, ropes and knots, and soon complete sharpening of a Japanese katana from start to finish. All right, well, thanks a lot. We'll see you in the next segment.